Now let's work on the post processing of our moving time lapse, which was our last time lapse that we shot. So basically, which had a panning movement with Genie Mini, but it didn't have any exposure changes. So post processing is time lapse is very simple and straightforward. It's exactly like how we did our first time lapse. We directly bringing that into After Effects and correct the first raw file and apply the same changes to the entire sequence. So you don't have to work on keyframes, or you don't have a lot to work. There are a lot of exposure changes happening, not in the camera settings per se, but in but in the environment. The light has been changing, the clouds are coming up, but it looks good as it is in the time lapse, because there is the shadows moving, sun is coming in and out of clouds, all looks good. However it is, we don't want to normalize them. We want it to look like there is exposure change, or the overall ambient exposure is changing throughout the sequence. Let's have a look at this time lapse. We have already rendered and kept the time lapse. Let's have a look at the time lapse. So now let's open After Effects and start working. So first thing I need to do is import the sequence. In this case, I have converted this sequence to a DNG sequence. This was done in Lightroom. So you can directly work on your sequence. For this specific case, I had to convert the sequence just because my After Effects was not supporting the raw format that the camera generated. I am just using the DNG sequence here. Make sure that you click on the entire sequence option and import the sequence. So you can see that there is already a settings done on this. So I am just resetting it. See, always if you wanted to keep a settings, you could export the settings also. Consider if you want to reapply or you wanted to reuse it for another sequence. Always make sure that you can export or save settings, all these settings, to a file or to an XMP file. So I'll just reset it, reset to camera defaults. So it looks like how we have shot. So again, the same thing, I'm going and changing into my camera landscape. So we can browse and go to the camera matching, which is something I like. It's a little more punchy and contrasty than this current. So I just changed to camera sequence, and again now these whites are overexposed. So I wanted to bring down the whites. So I'll try bringing down the whites and highlights. So I have a little more sky there, and I'll dehaze a little. So the atmosphere is there, the fog there, it makes a little hazy. So I'm just dehazing it and increasing the clarity. It brings up my local contrast a little more. So that's it. Maybe you could increase a little more saturation and vibrance, and you can go to the lens corrections, and you could undistort the footage. It's already been done. So you can undistort, and you can remove the chromatic aberration if there is any. If you can notice any purple or green fringes, you could remove it. In this case, not much. So in white balance looks fine. So it's fine. So I don't have to change anything. If you wanted to tweak it, you could try tweaking it a little. You could manually adjust the sliders. I think it's fine as we shot. This the bottom part of the frame, I had some like dirt and there's some undesirable objects. So what we would do is we would crop it in a way that we don't see this, because we have shot this in A7R2 and we have plenty of resolution. This is a 42 megapixel file. You could do a lot. You could reframe it, you could zoom it, and you could do a lot of things. So I would ideally avoid the bottom part of the sequence, bottom part of the frame. You could either crop it here or you could crop it later I would ideally crop it later in the software. So I'll just reload my settings, which is previously done. It's there, I have saved in desktop. So I'll reload the sequence. So it's a couple more differences that there. So click OK. So now the sequence is done. So you can see the resolution of the sequence is very high, that is around 8K. So I wouldn't want that. And one more thing that we have to do is, right now this sequence is in 30 FPS. So I'll go to interpret main and change this to 24 FPS. So it'll work fine with our 24 FPS sequence, so, or composition. Now I'll create a composition. I have already Ultra HD selected with 24 FPS. So again, this sequence settings, interpret footage main, this frame rate of the sequence you could decide based on what is your sequence settings, or based on your frame rate. So consider if you are shooting in 24 FPS or you are post processing in 24 FPS, keep it as 24 FPS. If you are in NTSC and you wanted 30 FPS, keep 30 FPS or 25. However, what is your composition frame rate, keep that frame rate here. So now I'll drag and drop the sequence into this, and obviously I'll have to scale down a lot because this is a very high resolution file and it's very hard to load in my software. So I'll scale it down to at least 50%. Let's see. So again, you could reduce the resolution here so that it shows in the screen, because it's a very big raw file, so it takes some time to preview it. So you could reduce the resolution here. So you could like full resolution, half, third, quarter, or you could even reduce it further to maybe 5 or 6 times. So you have a resolution that you could work based on your computer speed, how fast is your computer. You could, based on that, you could choose a resolution, choose vertically and horizontally, it's the same value. So I have now a low resolution file that I can work, or I can preview. So here I am not doing much. Again, I am cropping the sequence to work area. I am cropping the composition here. I just always say sequence, it is sequence in After Effects, composition here. So I'll select based on the duration, it's around 18.5 seconds. So select here, and composition, I would say trim composition to work area. So I have trimmed this composition to the exact duration of what I have. So now what I have to do is export it and check it. File, export, add to render queue. You could choose a format. You can render it as a sequence, JPEG sequence if you want it, or a QuickTime file. I am rendering as QuickTime Apple ProRes 422. You could choose the settings here. You could choose the codec that you wanted, and click OK and decide where you wanted the output to be. You could decide, save and render. So we have already rendered the file. I have rendered initially as a sequence, a JPEG sequence, because I wanted the full resolution file to be there. So I have rendered in a full resolution JPEG and converted into a 4K Ultra HD file also. A full resolution file, I could use it in case if you wanted to zoom or if you wanted to do anything. So I would. In this 4K file, I have removed the I have cropped the frame, and I have not included the bottom part of the frame, which had some dirt and some things that is not very desirable for this frame. So I have cropped that frame and used this way. So the same thing you could do even in After Effects here. It's say, I'll just undo the scale. I'll maybe go to 75% and I could use the part that I wanted, and I can frame accordingly however I want it. Maybe again 50 would work still. So I could choose how I want it, like how I want it to frame. I could choose that way. 45. So I think this is something that I can work. I can just remove the bottom part and I can export the sequence. So this is what the final sequence looks like. So with the moving time lapse, I am able to show the entire valley, and the beauty of the entire valley. I am able to pan across and still have the effect of time lapse. That's my clouds are moving fast. It's not like a video where everything is still. So I have a lot of dynamic movement in it. The camera is moving, all the shadows are moving, the clouds are moving. The overall time lapse looks very dynamic and dramatic, and it's This is something that we were looking for. So we are almost done with our course. It was a great experience for me personally to shoot this time lapse, and hope you also enjoyed following us throughout the journey. We highly recommend you to step out and start shooting. It is not how much you know technically, or it is not your technical knowledge that makes a great footage or a great time lapse. It is your willingness to go out and start shooting. Please share your time lapses with us. We'll be happy to see them.